So, good morning. Welcome to Tuesday, October 27th, week 8. What we'll do today is we'll talk just a little bit about that Christopher Ryan video from yesterday because there was a lot of stuff in it. And so, wow, my hands are really big on the screen, hey? We'll talk about that Christopher Ryan video. We'll try to put it together. There was a lot of material in there. Some of it was biology, some of it was anthropology, some of it was psychology, but we'll try to piece it together in a way that makes some sense in terms of what we're talking about in this class here. And then we'll move on, and I have a little video to show you. Yeah, so easy day, right? No hard lifting. Let me just see who is here. Sala's here. Good morning, Sala. And Amy's here. Good morning, Amy. And Daniel's here. Hello. Good evening to you, Daniel. Hello, Sabrina. Good morning. Gabrielle's here. Hello, Gabrielle. And Adel's here. Hello, Adel. And hello, George. And good evening to you, Vicky. And good morning, John. Okay. So, yesterday, right. Yesterday we were talking about yesterday we were okay, I'm going to start again. Yesterday we were talking about gender and sexuality, I guess, in general, right? And we were saying that in the West we kind of have an idea that we have a bit of a double standard in terms of how we socialize men and how we socialize women, right? And we said that men are often socialized to be kind of the dominant one in relationships, the one who does the pursuing, right? Man is the hunter, you know, thousands of years ago when we're hunting mammoths, but also when hunting, you know, for a date, right? Men are supposed to be the hunters, and as a result, they are encouraged to have lots of sexual relationships. They're encouraged to be promiscuous, right? And we see lots of examples of this in television and movies and in books. We have lots of heroes who go around and either, you know, sleep with a bunch of women, or at the very least it's implied, right? It's implied that they are like that. And of course, that's kind of framed by movies and television as cool, heroic male behavior, right? But we said that the same thing doesn't often apply to women, right? Not in real life and not even in fiction, right? Women are usually not encouraged to behave this way. Women are encouraged not to be promiscuous. Women are socialized to be pure and to be, you know, to how did we put it yesterday?
Innocent?
Yeah, to be innocent, to be pure, to save themselves, right? Whereas men are not encouraged to save themselves in any way, right? And so the question I was asking you yesterday was, why is this, right? Why do we have a double standard in terms of sexual behavior for men and women? And why are there tighter controls on women than there are on men? And why are there more stringent punishments on women and kind of lighter punishments on men for kind of breaking the rules, for being promiscuous, right? So we watched this TED Talk yesterday with Christopher Ryan, and he outlined his kind of idea for human sexuality, right? And so his main question was, what is human sexual behavior for? What is its purpose, right? Why do we do the things we do in kind of the sexual realm? And so what was his answer to that question? Because I think his answer to the question was the conclusion to his argument, right? What is the purpose of our sexuality as humans? Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so the conclusion of his argument, I think, was that we are animals who use our sexuality to bond with social others, right? For us, our sexuality is not just about reproduction. It has another function, right? And again, if you look at this, you know, for many animals that sexuality is just about reproduction, you know, they kind of get together, they go, you know, boom, 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 and they're done, right? There's no attachment. Neither animal seems to really enjoy it particularly, and that's it, right? And so their sexuality, some animals' sex drive is basically just to get them together and go, boom, 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 and then great, right? The female will give birth to a litter of pups or kittens or whatever, and the species will continue, the end, right? That's what their sexuality is for. But humans, it's much more complicated, right? Our sexuality has another function, right? Yes, we reproduce that way, but there's something else going on as well. And Christopher Ryan is saying that our sexuality is about maintaining complex social relationships. We're social animals, we're cooperative animals, and so he imagines that in our past, before agriculture, before farming, our hunter-gatherer ancestors probably had lots of different sexual relationships in the history of well, probably not lots. I mean, they didn't know that many people. There weren't that many people on the planet 100,000 years ago. And you probably lived in a small group, and you probably didn't live that long. So you wouldn't have a chance to have that many sexual partners, but you did, right? So he's saying we're not pair bonding animals. We're not monogamous animals by nature. We are promiscuous animals by nature, and we use our sexuality to create and maintain social bonds, right? So what are some of his premises? What is his evidence for saying this? Because of course that statement, that conclusion, really flies in the face of a lot of what society says, right? What are some things that society says that are in contrast to what Christopher Ryan is saying? Right. So there's a story in, at least in Western culture, and maybe in many of yours as well, that says there's one person, we marry that one person, and then that's it, right? You live happily ever after. There's no sex outside of the marriage. That's it, right? And so where do we get social messages like that from? Yeah, from religion, right? So definitely the most prominent world religions have this idea that there's no sex before marriage. You get married and then you can have sex with your husband, but there's no sex outside of the marriage, right? And so that's a very common belief in kind of some of the world's major religions. As a bit of an aside, monogamy and sort of the idea of no sex before marriage, in terms of the number of different cultures around the world, that idea is actually quite rare. So even though the big religion and a lot of people in the world ascribe to monogamy, lots of cultures actually don't. But again, those cultures are small and not as well known. But yeah, lots of cultures don't. Okay, so religion tells us a story that we're monogamous and there's only one man, one woman, till death do you part, that's it. Where else do we get those kind of messages from? Media? What kind of media?
Movies based on cheating and why you shouldn't do it, and the idea of multiple pregnancies is just not in the future.
Right. So we see lots of representations of monogamy in media, right? In movies, in television, in things like that. We always see monogamy, and cheating, of course, is portrayed as bad, and it is, right? If you make a promise to someone in a relationship that you're not going to do this very important thing, and then you do it, that's bad, right? So Christopher Ryan is not saying everyone should run around and cheat. He's not saying that, because if you promise something to someone, then you should keep that promise, and if you don't, you're going to hurt them. But it's true, we don't see a ton of promiscuous people, but often when we do, let's say this. Think of a romantic comedy situation. So The Bachelor, right? The Playboy, the stud, the guy who's running around with like a different woman every week or every 2 days or something like that. But then what happens to him by the end of the movie?
He found the right woman.
Yeah, he's going to find the right woman. He's going to fall in love, right? And he doesn't need all those other women because he's found the right one. And again, I'm not saying that none of that is true, but I'm just simply saying that society will send us the same message over and over again, right? That monogamy is natural and desirable and the way it should be. And, you know, yes, that guy was running around with all those different dates, but he, you know, he was wrong. Like, he didn't know what he was doing. Now he's found the one, right? The right one. And again, I'm not saying that there's no truth to that. There may be a lot of truth to that. But I'm saying that the social messages we receive are in conflict with what Christopher Ryan is saying is our biological nature, right? Okay, so what's some of his evidence? Because as good critical thinkers, we should ask Christopher Ryan, why should we believe you, Christopher? Why should we believe that humans are biologically promiscuous creatures who don't necessarily pair bond?
Tribes and cultures around the world.
Right.
Don't follow these monogamous rule.
Right.
Yes.
So we have lots of evidence. We have lots of anthropological or ethnographic, sorry for the fancy words, ethnographic evidence that shows us that there's lots of cultures around the world that are non-monogamous, right? And again, if you were biologically wired to be monogamous, all humans would be, right? If that's the way we were biologically wired, that's what we would all do, right? All humans are biologically wired to sleep and eat food, and surprise, surprise, we all do that, right? So the fact that some cultures do not practice monogamy, kind of the way that we practice it here in the West, shows us that, maybe not, right? Maybe not biological. What else does he show us in terms of evidence? Another premise. Primates, right? So what about primates? We are one, right? And?
Like about the animals who some of them have multiple partners, but some of them don't. So it shows that we can be others.
Right. So he kind of made a distinction, right? So he said that, you know, we're not related to apes, we are apes. Sorry. But we are. We are all apes. And he asked the question, what kind of ape are we? And so he kind of makes a distinction between apes that are monogamous, right? And apes that are non-monogamous, right? So the sort of more monogamous apes are gibbons and orangutans and gorillas, and the promiscuous ones are chimpanzees and bonobos. And so because of a few things, because of a few characteristics, Christopher Ryan groups us in with the promiscuous apes, right? He says we're more like these apes than these ones, right? We are more like the promiscuous apes than the more monogamous apes. What else does he say? How else does he prove his...
Hunter-gatherers?
Right? What about them? Oh, right. What about hunter-gatherers?
As we said in the past, they were someone didn't belong to anyone else, so they were they had multiple partners, and it was okay for them.
Right. So hunter-gatherers don't have any kind of idea of ownership, right? You can't own land, you can't own stuff, and so they share everything, right? And so the most important thing they share is probably food, right? So everyone goes out and the men hunt, the women gather, so the women look for like nuts and berries and roots and seeds and, you know, maybe like shellfish, maybe they'll collect shellfish and things like that. And then everybody comes back and everybody shares, right? And so what was that standard narrative, right? Men, the hunter, the protector, you know, the builder of shelter. Yes, I build shelter. I am man, right? And then he trades that for kind of sexual fidelity from a woman, right? So the woman promises not to have sex with any of those other guys, and he will give her food and shelter and protection, right? Which...
Fidelity is reproduction.
Fidelity is to be loyal to, or to like fulfill one's promise, if you will. Yes. So, yeah, so that standard narrative of that exchange doesn't make any sense with hunter-gatherers because they share everything, right? Women don't need a man to get access to food. In fact, they gather their own food and they share with everybody else. So they don't need to promise anything to a man to get fed. That's not how hunter-gatherers work. So that doesn't really make any sense based on what we know about anthropology now. Anything else? Any other premises that he had? So humans' sexuality has evolved to create and maintain complex social relationships because hunter-gatherers don't require this kind of standard narrative exchange kind of thing. We have lots of evidence of cultures around the world that are more promiscuous and non-monogamous. And if you look at our closest relatives, so our bonobos that share 99.1% of our DNA or something, which is a lot, right? That's exactly how they work, right? That they are more promiscuous, right? They're non-monogamous apes. So yeah, so he showed us some things here. This is we've kind of talked about this already. There's a bonobo, cute. He looks kind of thoughtful. Where he's like, I wonder if we are that similar to humans. I think that's what he's thinking about. Maybe he's thinking about bananas. I don't know. So this is the stuff we've talked about here. That's why I'm going through it so fast. So I think that's true. I think that's his argument, right? That humans' sexuality has evolved to maintain and create social relationships. And the evidence for that is our similarity to other primates, probably our hunter-gatherer past, and the fact that we have cultures around the world that are actually more promiscuous. They're non-monogamous. And again, if we were biologically wired to pair bond, no cultures would be doing anything except pair bonding, right? And so that's his evidence, right? Now, he also says a couple other things. He says that males in some societies feel that they have the right to monitor and to control women's sexual behavior, and that women's sexuality had become conflated or combined with property rights. And I wanted to bring that up because he kind of says it, in passing, right? He says that, I hope this work will, lead to this, but he doesn't really dig into it too deeply. But for our purposes here, I wanted to dig into it a little more deeply. So here's a couple things I want to pull out. So number one, we said that foragers, and I'm using a fancy term here, horticulturalists. These are very simple farmers, okay? So people who just kind of grow food in their backyard kind of thing. When you look at their culture, often you see that there's a lot more equality between men and women. So if hunter-gatherers or if horticulturalists get married, usually men and women enter into the marriage kind of equally, like they can choose to enter. If it doesn't go well, they can both choose to divorce. It's not a problem. In some cases, there's lots of sex that happens outside of the marriage, and even though you're not supposed to do it, sometimes it happens a lot anyway. Sometimes you see that there's a lot of sex that happens before marriage. And so some cultures will have, before a young person gets married, there's a kind of a number of years of kind of sexual exploration where they kind of, they date, they kind of see who they're most compatible with, and then eventually they wind up with someone, and then they get married and have kids, and that sort of normal stuff. So often you see that with societies like this. There's more kind of relaxed rules around sexuality. People can have more partners, definitely before marriage, and sometimes even when they are married. And again, if the rules get broken, usually there's not super severe punishments. And men and women are kind of on equal ground. And so if a woman says, hey, I'm tired of my husband, I'm out of here, she can do that just the same as he can, okay? The other thing you see with hunter-gatherers and with horticulturalists is often they're not too concerned with who the parent of a child actually is, right? So Christopher Ryan gave us the example of the tribes in the Amazon where they have partible paternity, right? And so this woman might have sex with the strong guy and the funny guy and the smart guy, and so that all of those guys will be the father of the child, right? And again, we know that's not how it works, but it doesn't matter because when the baby's born, those three men will step forward and sort of claim that, yes, I am the father of this kid. And it's not that big of a deal, right? It's not that big of a deal whose kid it actually is. With the Moswo people who he mentioned, actually, the father's also a non-issue because, again, children are raised by their mothers and their mother's brothers and sisters. So the family isn't built around a husband and wife relationship. The family is built around a blood relationship. And so if I was a Moswo man, I would be raising my sister's kids as if they were my own. Okay? That I would be responsible for providing for them and being a role model for them. My biological kids would be raised by my wife and her brothers, because that's just how families work. There's not many societies that work that way, but the Moswo do. And so again, whether my son, who I've had a baby with the woman over there. There's no woman over there, by the way. Whether he's my son or not doesn't really matter that much, right? Because he's definitely his mother's son, right? That's not usually up for debate, and that's kind of all that matters, right? However, if you look at agricultural communities, so communities that have switched to like full-on agriculture, they have, they're very committed to farming. They have big fields and plows and grain silos and sometimes hierarchical social structures. The first ones of these are kind of like ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, the Sumerians, the Akkadians, and then all the way up till, not quite up till today, well, maybe up till today in some places. Societies that are very committed to agriculture in this way, they display a different pattern. And so there's often less equality between men and women. There's less flexibility in marriage, so often marriages are arranged. Divorces are not possible. And again, there's a very strong concern about the parentage of the child, like particularly the father, right? Who the father is. Why might that be, do you think? Why do you think we see that difference between hunter-gatherers and kind of agricultural communities?
Socialization.
Yes, but there's more.
And what they believe, right?
Yes, it is what they believe, but it has to do also, there's an economic factor involved. Okay, so one explanation that we could bring into play here is something to do with property ownership and patrilineality and inheritance, okay? So patrilineality is a fancy word here. It means that you trace your ancestry through your father's side of the family, okay? So maybe just in the room here, if you think about the people on your father's side of the family, and you think about the people on your mother's side of the family, are all of those people equally parts of your family? Or is one side more important than the other? Same? Same?
Back home, like, we speak dialects, and my parents both speak different dialects, but on paper, I'm Cantonese because my dad's Cantonese, even though my mom's not.
Right.
So I consider it equal, but on paper, there was this one time, like, my relatives came up to me and asked me, and I said what I was on my mom's side, and they got really mad, so that side is more important.
Right. And Anna, is it the same for you or different?
Yeah, kind of.
Kind of like more one side than the other? Or no?
I know my fathers, but we treat each other like
Yeah. Yeah. So often it depends on the family and it depends on the culture a little bit. Most cultures are patrilineal. And so you trace most of the ancestry through the father's side of the family. Okay, so sometimes it means that the mother's side of the family is totally separate and you don't care about them. Sometimes it just means that there's more importance given to the father's side of the family. And so in Western culture, traditionally, we are like that. And you can see that in last names, right? My last name comes from my father, right? And that's the last name that his father had and his father before him, right? So that's something that's passed down through the male line, and it shows kind of a preference for the father's side of the family. So for agriculturalists, people who are kind of hardcore committed to farming, they often do own their land, right? We said that hunter-gatherers don't really own anything, particularly land. So hunter-gatherers feel that the land is like their mother. And so you can't own your mother, right? That's weird, right? And so similarly, they feel you can't own land. But of course, agriculturalists do believe that, right? You have your farmland, you have a deed from the bank that says that this is yours. You can sell the land and get a bunch of money and go buy some other land somewhere else. This is normal behavior, right, for agriculturalists and probably for all of us. And since most of these agricultural communities are also patrilineal, that's how inheritance gets passed down. And so in kind of traditional patrilineal societies, not only your name gets passed down, but your wealth, right? So I would inherit, hopefully, Dad, if you're listening, hopefully there's still some wealth left for me to inherit. But my wealth, my inherited wealth would come from my father, right? And I, hopefully, if I have some wealth when I die, I will pass it down to my son, and he'll pass it down to his son, right? So inheritance moves through the male line of the family, through the father's side. So what does this mean? Well, if I'm a landowner, if I'm a farmer, and let's say I've done well, I'm wealthy and I have lots of land, I want to pass my wealth and my name and my legacy, the family legacy, I want to pass it down to my son. But this kid here who has been living in my house and has been eating my food, how do I know he's my son? How do I know he's not Daniel's son? Or Kang's son, or Jack's, or Henry's? How do I know he's mine? Well, actually, we'd probably know, right? But there's no DNA testing thousands of years ago, or hundreds of years ago. How do I make sure that this kid is actually mine and not some other guy's?
Strict rules for women?
Yeah, exactly. I control the sexuality of my wife and of women in society in general. So I make sure, we make sure as a society that women don't have sex with any men before marriage, right? We make sure that they're virgins. And then when we get married, we make sure that that woman only has sex with her husband, right? That way, the man can be absolutely sure that his son is actually his, right? And he can feel comfortable passing his wealth and land down to someone who he knows to be his son, not Kang's, right? Stay away from my wife, Kang. So, but that's often what you see. And so these societies tightly control the sexuality actually of both genders, of both men and women, but more particularly women, right? And the controls can actually be quite restrictive. And not only is there no sex before marriage and no sex outside of marriage, but sometimes if your husband should die, there's no sex for you with other men. Other men will not marry you. If you should cheat on your husband, if you should have sex with someone else, the punishments can be quite severe. And often it comes from a situation like this, where inheritance is important and the patrilineality is important, but the only way to ensure that children belong to their father is to make sure that there's no sex outside of the marriage. And so, again, you see very tight controls on sexuality, and you see harsh punishments for people who violate the rules, particularly women, right? And so this is kind of what Christopher Ryan was talking about when he said that women's rights had become attached to property rights, right? So for me to pass down my property to my son, my wife has to follow certain rules of sexual behavior. And if she doesn't, she compromises that sort of property transfer, right? She compromises my ability to pass down our family's legacy to my real son, not to King's son. So yeah, over time, women's sexual behavior becomes attached to property rights, and eventually, women actually get seen as property, right? At one point in Canada, and probably in a number of countries still around the world, it's thought of that you cannot rape your wife. So in Canada, they used to think that you could not rape your wife. Why not? Because she belonged to you, right? Can I steal my iPhone? No, you can't steal something that belongs to you. That's ridiculous, right? And so similarly, can you rape something that belongs to you? And at a certain time in history, in Canadian history, the answer was no, you can't. Now, of course, you can. It's wrong. But at the time, women were seen as property.
But isn't that what marriage is? You sign on paper to say that you are now together and you belong to each other?
Well, yes, but kind of that sort of commitment is more, in a soulmate-y relationship kind of way, not so much in a legal ownership kind of way. But in the past, it very much was a legal ownership kind of way. How many of you have been to like a Christian wedding? Hi, Nuba and Jarek. Sorry, I just saw you here. Hello. Yeah, how many seen a Christian wedding? Have been to a Christian wedding? Seen one on TV or in the movies? There we go. Okay. Yeah, everyone's seen one on TV. And so, okay, so how does it go? Usually I act this out, but I'm not going to stand up. So how does it go? So there's usually a church, right? Usually a church. And so the groom's standing up at the front, right, with the priest and his best man, hopefully not too hungover from the night before, although depending on the movie, sometimes. Sometimes in certain movies, the best man will be whispering to the groom, "It's not too late. You can still get out." No, just teasing. So the groom's there, and where does the bride come from?
Your father.
Yeah, she comes in from the back, right, from the back of the church, and she comes in with her father, right? So her father kind of walks her down the aisle, right, and maybe he's teary, right? It's so sweet, and his daughter looks so beautiful, right? And he walks her down the aisle, and then he gets to the front, and he gives her a little kiss, and "Oh, you look so beautiful, sweetheart." And he kind of sends her up, and then he goes and sits down, and then the bride and the groom are at the altar, and then the priest can utter the magical incantations, right? That's how it works? Yeah. Do you know what that process is called, where the father of the bride walks the bride down the aisle? What's he doing?
I'm not sure, but I would assume it's a handover.
It's a handover, the big handoff, right? Yeah, it is a handoff, but do you know what it's actually called? What he's actually doing? This is called he's giving her away. So, and this is how it's still referred to. And so, and young women will want their fathers to give them away, right? That's what they want their father there to walk them down the aisle, and because it's sweet, right? It's cute and it's tradition, and it's nice to have your daddy there, right? That's nice. But the name for it does kind of come from a time when women were kind of seen as property, right? They were attached to their father. Their father was responsible for them. And then when it came time for them to get married, he walks her down the aisle, and then he gives her to this other dude, right? Because this other dude is going to be responsible for her now, right? He's going to be kind of in possession of her. And Avera's like squirming in her seat right now because this sounds highly uncomfortable and awful, right? And it's true, it is awful, but of course, we still do it because it's a cute tradition and because it's become separated from its original meaning. So, lots of women in Canada and the US, they want their fathers to give them away, to walk them down the aisle. They ask their fathers to do it. Their fathers are happy to do it. It's very sweet. But none of these women think that they're going to become the possession of their husband, right? So that the original meaning has changed, right? This is the symbol means something different now, but we still call it giving her away, right? Similarly, we still do the same thing where, again, we talked about this yesterday, what do we call a guy that's really successful with women, right? He's an alpha, he's a player, he's a stud, right? What do we call a woman who does the same thing?
Slut.
Yeah, a bunch of words that I'm not going to repeat on camera here, but we know what they are, right? So again, you can see evidence of that inequality between men and women in Western society. You can see evidence of women as property in the past. And again, it's connected to the fact that now in the West here, we're kind of more of a post-industrial information society. I'm not sure what we are now. But before all that, we were an agricultural society like many others. And so our roots kind of show a little bit in some ways. And they show there in terms of the giving away. And they still show in terms of our attitude towards sexuality for men and women, right? And so that's kind of what Christopher Ryan was talking about. That women's rights had, women's sexuality had become conflated with property rights. And he said that men traditionally have felt the need to monitor women's sexual behavior because of this sort of ancient might be a little bit much, but because of this earlier way in which we practice sexuality, where women's sexuality was tightly controlled to make sure that a man's son was actually biologically his. Was biologically his, okay? Does that make sense? Yeah. And so, again, you see lots of societies like this where women's sexuality is tightly controlled, and in many cases it goes back to a situation like this, where men had control of land, of wealth, of property, and women were kind of provided for, right? They didn't have any wealth or rights or ability to sort of make a living on their own. And so they would be attached to their fathers, and then they would be given in marriage to a guy, right? And then the guy would become responsible for her. But again, you can see that in lots of different cultures today, because a lot of cultures sort of come from some kind of background like that. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay, let's see where we are. Okay, one more slide and then we'll take a break here. So kind of the overarching ideology here that we're talking about is patriarchy. Has anyone heard of the patriarchy before? Have you heard that word before? So patriarchy comes from two Greek words. Patros is father, and archon, which is ruler. And so patriarchy is the patros archon, the father as the ruler, or in this case, the men as the ruler, right? So patriarchy is the idea that men are the dominant gender, that they should be in charge, that they are more rational, more strong, that they should be the leaders, right? And so often society is structured around this belief, right? In terms of how we organize our families, right? How many families in your families, your father is the head of the household, is or was the head of the household? Yeah, right? That's kind of a traditional thing, right? Do you think more bosses are men or women? Men, right? Because we're kind of conditioned to see patros archon, right? We're socialized to see father as the ruler, even in the home, right? As we grow up, we see a man as the leader of the household. And so when we go into the world of work, it's only natural to see a man as the leader of your company, right? Although I will say here at Columbia College, we're very fortunate in that we don't have that situation. So our principal, our vice principal operations, our HR manager, our financial controller, our head of secondary, Sarah, who am I missing? Most of our directors and governors all of those people are women. So this organization is overwhelmingly led by women. Yeah. And actually, I should do the math and see what the staff is like as well. I feel like we have a pretty even balance, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that. But definitely in terms of leadership and management and governance, this college is led by women, significantly so. Okay, you want to take a little break? Breaky. Okay, take a break, come back, and then we'll talk about something different, and I'll show you a video. Okay. Okay, and we're back. So Christopher Ryan tried to make an argument about who we are as biological animals, right? As animals that are more promiscuous. And this kind of monogamy thing is not something that we are naturally wired to do, but that doesn't mean that we can't do it, right? And so lots of societies send us social messages that monogamy is correct or desired or natural or the way it should be. And again, it very much feels like that's the way it should be, right? So even if you agree with Christopher Ryan, and I think I do, I think I agree with his conclusions, that doesn't necessarily mean that suddenly all your socialization goes out the window, right? So if I believe in what Christopher Ryan says, if I believe his conclusions, does that mean that I am suddenly okay with my wife having sex with other men? No, I'm definitely not okay with that, right? So again, even though we might be biologically wired to do one thing, if we know anything about humans, we know that they are adaptable, right, and flexible. And so our socialization plays an important role in the way we behave. And so just because we might be wired one way doesn't mean that we can't behave another way, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't behave another way. It just means that, in some cases we might have to work a little bit harder to do it, right? This is a bit of an aside, but since I heard you talking, we are biologically wired to eat and enjoy sweet things, right? So our taste buds are kind of tuned to sugary stuff. We love sugary stuff, and we seek it out, right? And so does that mean that it is good for us necessarily? No, right? In small doses, it's fine, in reasonably small doses, but we actually have to behave in a slightly different way, right? We're wired to seek out sweet things, but of course, thousands of years ago, very few things were actually that sweet, right? Maybe fruit is that sweet. It's not as sweet as a Snickers, but fruit is sweet, right? But it's only available at one time of the year, right? In kind of late summer, early fall. And if you want to get stung a bunch of times, you can raid a honeybee hive and get some honey, and honey is sweet. But that's the only place you can get sugar thousands of years ago. So we're very much wired to like it and to seek it out, but thousands of years ago it was much harder to come by. Of course, now it's very easy to come by, and we have to modify our behavior, right? We have to make a special effort to eat healthy, even though we like sugar and our bodies really want it, right? And so here it's a similar thing, right? Even though we might be wired one way, it might be more kind of desirable or useful for us to behave in another way. And we can do that as human beings, right? Okay, so I said that Western societies have traditionally been characterized by a pretty significant inequality between men and women, right? To the point where in the past in Western societies, women were things. Women were property. You could not rape your wife because she belonged to you, and you can't rape something that belongs to you, which is awful and wrong. But of course, that's the way that it was. There's a famous court case. I'm from Alberta. There's a famous court case, I think in the 1920s from Alberta, where a woman named Emily Murphy was appointed as a judge. So she was appointed as a justice in Alberta in 1922 or something like that. But somebody, a man of course, pointed out the fact that the law said that the judiciary, the position of judge, of magistrate, had to be held by a person. But in other laws, women actually weren't defined as persons. And so this man was saying she can't be appointed a judge. A judge has to be a person, and according to the law, women are not persons. And he was right. The law did say that. And so there was a big fight in Canada, a legal fight. It went to the Supreme Court of Canada. The Supreme Court of Canada said, nope, can't do it. Women are not persons. Finally, because we were still tightly connected to Great Britain at the time, Emily Murphy and a group of 4 or 5 other women went to the British legislature and said, can you please rule on this? And the British legislature took about 5 minutes and said, yeah, women are persons. she can be a magistrate. But again, as recently as 100 years ago, Emily Murphy could not be a judge because the law did not define her as a person, which is shocking. But they won the case, and eventually she did become the first female magistrate in Alberta. But it was a fight. It was a bit of a fight. But anyway, even though we come from that sort of history of inequality, are we equal now? Are men and women equal now? No, still not, right? Why not? Why not? And so that's what I want to do with this next video that I'll show you. And so, you know, we could probably just do this in the classroom by asking the young women here to share their experiences, but that might be a little bit that might be a little bit awkward. And so what we're going to do is we're going to listen to the experiences of 4 or 5 other young women, okay? And so we're going to watch a short, well, maybe it's like medium length documentary called What Stands in the Way of Women Being Equal to Men, okay? And so we'll watch this video, and in the process, I want you to pay attention to 4 questions, okay? And online people, I put this into Microsoft Teams already. So as we watch, I want you to pay attention to a few things. Number 1, what kind of messages about boys or girls or men or women, about 2 genders, what kind of social messages are being circulated in different cultures? And so we will be kind of visiting different cultures. We'll visit Iceland, we'll visit Jordan, we'll visit the UK, we'll visit Britain, we'll visit Lesotho, and I feel like there's another one. Iceland, UK, Jordan, Lesotho. I think there's another one, but I can't remember. We'll see. There might be another one. So what kind of social messages are being circulated? Do you think these messages are based in fact? And so we're talking about monogamy and sexual behavior and how, you know, is it based in biological fact? So are some of these messages based in biological fact or not? Are there any social institutions that are involved in the circulation of these messages? And then finally, the million-dollar question, what is actually standing in the way of women being equal to men? Cool, cool? Okay, so let's watch this thing. So online people, I'm going to turn you loose to watch it. Maybe let's come back in 20 minutes and compare notes on this, okay? So I'm just going to put, for online people, I'm going to put 22 minutes on the clock, and then I'll turn you loose to watch the video and then come back after watching 20 minutes of it, okay? The link is in Microsoft Teams. Okay. All right. All kinds of things to talk about. So we've met four. Is there four young women? There's Vigdis, right? Vigdis is from Iceland. There was Lulu from London. There was Shwe Shwe from Lesotho, and there was Mira from Jordan, right? So there's four. So we've got these four young women, and they're talking to them, of course, about their experiences in the societies that they live in. What kind of social messages do you see circulating around some of these girls? What do they tell us?
A girl is expected to be well dressed and attractive, and
Right.
they has less freedom compared to boys.
Right. So Vigdis, I think, expresses that her physical appearance seems to be more important than men's physical appearance, and she has to kind of put more work into it, and she's expected to be pretty or made up or well dressed all the time. And yeah, she feels she has more rules and restrictions put on her than men, right? And I think all the girls kind of express that idea. What else do we hear from these girls?
That the father of the family can control the daughters.
Right. So we see a couple of. I guess maybe was that Mira or Mira was talking. Yeah. So her father plays an important role in her life, right? He has a lot of kind of authority over her, and so she's kind of talking about a little bit about how I think she wishes she had more freedom as well, right? To smoke, apparently, and probably other things too. But she wants to smoke, right? Okay, so yeah, okay. What else do we hear?
Gender roles, right? So there's certain jobs, sports, things that are designated for guys, and girls should not even think about it.
Right. So we hear about lots of activities that are gendered, right? Certain professions, and so I think it's Vigdis who mentions that. Yeah, if you think about a plane, you imagine the pilot as a man and the I was going to say stewardess, but that's not right. The flight attendant as a woman, right? Even though, of course, it could be the opposite, but you imagine these people a certain way, right? We have stereotypes about what certain occupations, what gender should be in certain occupations, right? And we talked about that with elementary school teachers. We imagine women, right? If I mention a nurse, we imagine women, right? If you think about a construction worker, you imagine a man, right? So our occupations are gendered, and many of our activities are gendered as well. And depending on the country and the culture and the society we live in, those activities may be strongly gendered or just a little bit less so, right? But yeah, we see that. What else do we see or hear?
The boys at the end, like one of them doesn't want to live off a woman's pay. Like he wants to work, but he's okay with the woman working as well. But the other one wouldn't like that the woman earns more than him.
Right. So those guys talk a little bit about how they don't want their wife to earn more money than them. That's just not acceptable. Why not?
They feel like they has less powers compared to his wife.
They feel like they have less power.
And because they also feel that their roles will be switched.
Oh, they might feel the roles will be switched.
Household, like so gender roles. So the woman is supposed to take care of children, bring up children. Guys are supposed to bring them up. So to strip that away from the guy, what is he supposed to do? What does he bring to the table for this family?
Right. Which is kind of a very interesting statement, right? Because, if we definitely do, I think probably in most of our cultures have an idea of men as the provider, right? The head of the family and the person who brings home the money, right? Brings home the bacon. But it's interesting to hear these guys say, yeah, well, if I'm not that, then what am I? What am I good for? Right? And so, but what do you think? Like, is that Is that a valid idea? Is that all men are good for in the household?
Men can cook and take care of the baby.
We can cook and take care of kids, right? Sometimes we even clean up after ourselves. What else? That's all we're good for. Okay, what else do we hear? We heard some things from Lulu as well in the UK, but it's tough. Her accent is tough to understand. And so, were you able to get anything from Lulu? Lulu is the second girl. So she's in London. She kind of has the wavy hair. And I think she was learning dance moves with her friends.
I think she said about having relationship with boys.
She did talk about that. Yes. What did she say? What did she say?
How did the boys respond to them saying that they had relationships before?
Oh, okay. So they were asking her about her sexual history, right? And so she was kind of bringing up an odd paradox, right? An odd kind of conflict for women, because if they have had sexual partners before, or if they're perceived to have had sexual partners before, what do they get called? Yeah, they get. I'm not going to repeat those names. But then, if a guy's hitting on them and they're like, "No, I don't want to have sex with you," then what do they get called? Yeah, they get called prude, or the S word that I won't say. Yeah, so it's like women have no choice. If these young women are sexually active, they get called one bad thing. If they don't want to be sexually active with a particular guy, they get called another bad thing, right? So there's no. Lulu is kind of saying, not maybe in so many words, but she's saying there's no way to win here, right? If I say no, they'll call me one bad thing. If I say yes, they'll call me another bad thing. I can't win, right? Daniel says some cultures don't allow. Oops, I'm going to get rid of my counter here. Yeah, some cultures won't allow women to act freely like men do, and so yeah, I would say there's kind of two parts to that. Is that most cultures will not allow women to act exactly like men do, and men have more freedom, right? What kind of freedoms do we see men enjoying here? Yeah, so Mira says, yeah, the guys are out there playing basketball, and she's not supposed to play, or not allowed to play with them, or not allowed to play at all. She's not allowed to smoke. Of course, she's 15, so of course you're not allowed to smoke, Mira. If she was my daughter, she wouldn't be allowed to smoke either. But anyway, what else? Right, so depending on where in the world you are, walking alone at night may or may not be safe, right? In Iceland, it appears to be much safer than in New York City, although that's probably pretty self-evident. What else?
Talking.
What's that?
Talking.
Talking? What do you mean?
Like men can say the rough and rude things when women cannot.
Right. So men can get away with saying rude things, or, kind of offensive things, but it's much different coming from a woman, right? What else?
The father is kind of like owed them to like she's a piece of glass and she'll shout at anyone with this.
Oh, that was Mira's father, Marwan, right? Saying that girls are kind of cute and soft, and they need to be kind of protected a little bit. Which is true. Girls are cute and soft, but do they need the protection of men?
No.
Yeah, for some physical activity, like being bullied or something, they need a man. But
I don't know. Do they? Girls, do you need us to defend and protect you? You don't? Really?
yeah, for some situation, like when
What good are we then?
Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah, for some situation when like you're a girl out of the street, so if there's no man around her, like she can't protect herself.
Where sometimes girl can fight in
Yeah,
battle.
like yeah, sometimes some girls like can't.
There's self-defense classes.
the end, but like some guy is just like too powerful.
It's tough because I don't. There's very extreme cases where it's like, oh, I don't know. There's the thing about chivalry, and then there's also protection. So on one hand, it's like, yeah, we want to be equal, but so then chivalry wouldn't exist. And it's kind of like a pick and choose one.
That's another kind of paradox you get stuck in, right? It's just like Lulu with, if she's promiscuous or not, either way she loses. And with women, again, either they say they don't need help from men, but then apparently they can't accept any help from men, right? It's like you're either this or you're that, right? And you can't. Again, it's a binary opposition, again, right? So you're either like, well, you either like chivalry or you're a totally independent modern woman and you don't need men, right? And there's apparently nothing in between, right? Girls, how do you protect yourself when you're kind of out in the world?
Pepper spray.
Pepper spray, yeah. Good tip. Don't mess with a Vera, unless you want to get maced. No, I'm just kidding. What else? So pepper spray, yeah, but what else?
Just keep our distance.
Yeah, you have to be alert, right? You have to pay attention to your surroundings and pay attention to other people, right?
Although it's not fair, but we try to not go out late at night.
Right. Yeah.
It's not fair, but yeah, we don't do that. As we know, it's not kind of safe, but
Right. There are, yeah, so women may behave differently based on those ideas, right? You may decide, oh no, it's too late, it's too dark, I don't have anyone to walk with, I'm just not going to go out, right? Or whereas a man would probably just go, right? Anything else? Any other social messages that we've heard so far?
Was it the isolating girls, men? That is the first one, the first verse. She said that when a girl speak up for like the right, they would be saying that you are so feminist, you are so annoying.
Right. Has anyone kind of heard that sentiment about feminists? Kind of like being a feminist is like somehow a bad thing? You feel that way? Okay, tell me about that. That's good. Tell me about that. Well, it's not good, but tell me.
Okay. Because there are such extremes, like there is no. Not all feminists are bad or being feminist is bad, but
Sure.
it has come to a point where we come to a middle ground, and if you're a feminist, a lot of the times you're very extreme about it, and it's just a lot. It's two sides. It's not just feminists, the people that are on the opposite as well. It's just two sides of people that cannot hear each other arguing, and they're all just really annoying.
Right. So there certainly are some feminists, right? Some people who are standing up for women's rights or simply for gender equality, right? There are some people who are doing that, and there are some people who are very extreme in their views and kind of very loud and outspoken, and sometimes a bit much, right? But again, if we think of all feminists that way, who benefits from that stereotype? Men do, right? Because do you want to be labeled a feminist if that's what feminists are like? No, of course you don't, right? Nobody does. Nobody wants to be labeled as a, extreme crazy person, right? And so that stereotype, the stereotype of the feminist, like, oh, she's a feminist, she's, oh, I'm never going to hear, that kind of thing, of course, benefits men. And so it actually scares women away from being part of a cause and labeling themselves as something that would benefit them. But the more we kind of the more that the stereotype of the sort of crazy, militant feminist circulates around, the fewer women actually want to be part of it, and the fewer women that will call themselves feminist. And then, of course, who will that benefit? Benefits men, right? But yeah, a lot of people feel that way, and it's unfortunate because, feminism on its in its sort of general form is fantastic, right? Okay, there's more to talk about, but we're totally out of time here, so I'm going to call it. Online people, we'll finish this tomorrow. Have a nice afternoon. I'll see you then.